David Borger is the Western Sydney Director of the Sydney Business Chamber, a division of New South Wales Business Chamber. In this role, David advocates for the needs of leading businesses in the Western Sydney area, helping set the policy agenda and promote discussions on issues that contribute to economic activity and growth in Western Sydney. Prior to this, David has served as Minister for Housing, Minister for Western Sydney and Minister for Roads, as well as Assistant Minister for Transport in the New South Wales Government. Sorry, I got a bit tongue-tied. There's a lot of ministers in there. As Housing Minister, David oversaw the construction of approximately 9,000 new social housing dwellings, which is probably very relevant to the people here today. David's achievements also include holding the office of Lord Mayor of Parramatta, where he served for 3 terms. Today, David will be talking about growing the southwestern Sydney region. So please welcome David Borger.
G'day. I've got 2 microphones here. I'm not sure which one's working, but I'm wired up and everyone can hear me. Look, I thought I'd give a presentation today just about Western Sydney because that's been, I guess, my focus for the last 20 years really in my job, but particularly in the last few years with the Business Chamber. So I might just explain who we are. What is a Business Chamber? And people sort of know local chambers of commerce. So we're not a local chamber of commerce. We're a group that represents very large companies and organisations within Western Sydney. So cities around the world have these groups, London, New York, they've all got various groups trying to advocate for change, for good change. And so our group consists of people who run big professional services companies, universities, vice-chancellors, football teams, the tourism area, sort of ANZ Stadium and Allphones Arena and all of that. And we're trying to get all of those people in a room at one time and work out how we can actually influence the agenda in a positive way for the region. So Sydney's always had many of these groups that have had big voices. Western Sydney in the past hasn't. They've had not parochial, but individual voices around mayors at various stages, universities and so on, but it hasn't had a united team approach to the whole region. So we started 3 years ago with 0 membership and no agenda. We've got 60 CEOs and managing directors and so on who are part of a group now, and we're really keen to work on pushing the agenda, particularly on infrastructure, because Western Sydney has had a deficiency and many challenges. So I'll go through my presentation. The beginning of the presentation paints a challenging picture about the economic forces that are impacting on the whole West, and the end of the presentation looks at the opportunity. So it starts off a bit negative, but don't get too stressed. There's some good news in here as well. So when we were working out what do we stand for, this image, which is produced by Bob Moe, who must be 80 years old, he's an architect planner who's really been passionate about Western Sydney for a long time. So I think the barbecue stopper for the region is not so much jobs. People do have work. Yes, there are areas of high unemployment. There's some particular challenges. The big issue is how far people have to travel to get to their job. So these figures are in net terms. So every day there's about 2 million people that live in Western Sydney. It's sort of Macrock and Wesrock and all the rocks. 2 million people, and every day 300,000 people travel outside the region to access work and 100,000 travel back in. So the net deficit's 200,000. And when you go to Wollongong, they say, we've got a real crisis. We've got 15,000 people leaving town every day to work in Sydney, you know. Okay, that's a crisis. 200,000 is a bigger challenge. And if we do nothing, it's going to get bigger because the population's growing in Western Sydney. We have land. It is cheaper land than in Eastern Sydney, and housing affordability is a major issue. So housing development continues at a cracking pace. And eventually, if we don't do anything, by 2061, 500,000 people will be leaving town every day to get to work. Now, if you're in Parramatta and you're catching the train to Sydney, that's within a reasonable commute. If you're in outer Western Sydney, it's a big, big challenge. It impacts on your personal life, your family life, your community life. You're not there to help the kids with homework, kick a football, or, you know, hit the gym because you're stuck on the M4, the M5, the M7 and all of the other lines. So when we started looking at this, we thought, well, what can we do to fix this problem? And one thing we can do is widen the pipes. So we can and we probably should do that, and some of that's happening at the moment. There's some really good infrastructure happening in both road and rail. But if we widen the pipes, we're still playing catch-up. We are never going to actually reduce that deficit by widening those pipes. The other thing we can do is build more housing where the really strong employment markets are in the centre of Sydney. And of course that's challenging with the nature of heritage neighbourhoods and precincts and people that quite like where they live and don't particularly want other people to come and join them. But some of that should happen, and some of that would be quite productive for our city. The third thing we could try and do, though, is say, well, how can we actually grow employment in Western Sydney so people don't have to travel as far to get to work? How can we create more opportunities here? And unfortunately, it's much harder than at first it might seem to create jobs. Governments don't really create jobs, but they can create conditions for employment to occur. So this presentation is really about how do we fix this big problem that I'm sure many of you face, and also many of your students and your families and your communities. Can I just get a sense, how many people live in Western Sydney? Okay, so that's, how many people don't live in Western Sydney? Okay, so it's about half and half. All right, that's good. You're part of the contraflow, so thank you. The population is going to change. Traditionally, Western Sydney was a minority of Sydney. It's going to become the majority of Sydney. We're starting to see politically Western Sydney's affecting every election. And in the past, Western Sydney was almost 100% the ALP. It's a more contestable area now, which means that there's more competition for the hearts and minds. That's not a bad thing in one sense, because we need a lot of energy, we need a lot of investment, and a lot of attention. So, I mean, this graph just shows that sometime after 2021, we hit this magic moment when more people live in the west than the east, and then it just gets bigger and bigger for Western Sydney. So, as a political force, this is going to be more and more of a challenge over time. Where are the jobs going to come from in the future? So, this is not a surprise to you. Manufacturing was always the biggest part of the Western Sydney economy. It always employed the most number of people. That's been changing. So this is from Jeff Ball, a Melbourne economist. It just shows you what we all know. In 1966, the share of employment that was in manufacturing was very high. And this is for Australia, not for Western Sydney. And there's been a gradual, well, it's not gradual, there's been a consistent and substantial decline. Interestingly, within manufacturing, there are some growth areas. Food manufacturing is very strong, particularly in Western Sydney. So there are some bright spots, food being one of them, and real opportunities with China and Asia because of the health crises and food crises around milk and certain things. I think China and Asia do look to Australia as a clean, safe, high quality, high value food country. We're probably unlikely we're probably more likely to be working in the space of value added, higher value foods rather than mass-produced foods, because in the long term other countries might be able to do that cheaper than we can. But food's certainly a bright spot, and you can see the other industries that have declined. Within, sorry, a bit of a complicated graph here, within manufacturing there have been some areas of work that have gone up and some that have gone down. Unsurprisingly, less skilled jobs have been disappearing, and highly unskilled jobs have been disappearing very fast. Why is that? Well, China's doing it better, quicker, faster, cheaper. It's a more efficient machine for producing mass production in low quality. It's also a pretty efficient machine at producing high quality now as well. And managerial, professional and scientific have been going up. So manufacturing's been getting smaller and it's been getting a bit more high-tech at the same time, which is probably where it needs to go in the future. This is a graph, an American graph, but it just shows the same thing. I mean, America had, the United States, 21 or so million people employed in manufacturing in 85, and it was down to about 11 million. So they lost about 10 million manufacturing jobs. They halved their employment. I mean, that is a massive implosion of a really big sector. Why did it happen? It's the same story as Australia. I mean, manufacturing was really big in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. All the migrants came from Europe and around the world, very poor, and they turned up in the Lower East Side in those tenement buildings, and they clothed the world. That was the centre of the garment industry. And after 1950, what happened? Where did it go? It disappeared out of the city centre of the biggest city in the world, and it went to the suburbs first, because you could put manufacturing anywhere as long as you had good electricity and good roads. Manufacturing could just disperse, and it did. It went out of the city centres, it went to the suburbs, and then it went to China. It was offshored, and the same sort of things happened here. It's still here. It's not dead. It's not, there's still people working in manufacturing. But look, Bruce and I from the Chamber, we met with Jason Little recently. He runs Goodman. They're the biggest industrial land developer in Australia. They're the biggest in New South Wales. They have an enormous proportion of the market. They've done all of Eastern Creek and all of that. They almost have no factories now. It's all warehousing and logistics. There are still some factories, but their share of the market is really unimportant now in their business model. So it just shows you where we've been going there. I won't talk about this. This is the price gradient for cities. The one thing I will say is that, though, is people are moving back to cities to live. So in the 70s in New York, I don't know if anyone saw Escape from New York, the guy with the mullet. So that was picking up on fears that existed at the time where there was this thing called white flight. People were leaving downtowns, they were going to the suburbs were the future. They're escaping the pollution and the crises of high unemployment rates in the inner cities. And what's happened in the last 20 years, the last 10 years, in just about every city in America, people moving back to the downtowns. I was in LA recently, amazing city. Los Angeles had a great town. I mean, it had a wonderful grid, it had big buildings like we do in Sydney and other places. And after 1950, everyone just left town. And the suburban sprawl of LA started. You know, the streetcars were ripped out, the lines were ripped out, the cars came, the freeways were built and amplified, and people moved out of the downtown. And it's bizarre going there. You get this sense that this was once an incredible city centre and then everyone left except for a couple of professional service firms. Well, now it's turning around. Everyone's moving back. The developers are in there. Young people are much less likely to get a licence now. They're much less likely to get probably more out here because you need to have a licence, you need to drive. But licence rates are going down massively. People are on social media. They want to commute. They want public transport. They don't want to travel too far for their work or for their education. And they want all the other things that city centres bring with them. A sense of life and retail and lifestyle and all the rest of it. So this is a challenge for Western Sydney. So this is a graph from a book by the Grattan Institute. They put out an interesting paper called The Productivity of Australian Cities. And I love this because a bit of Western Sydney actually gets left off the map. So if you live in Penrith, you're actually chopped off. You don't even exist, which is a shame. But this really shows you how many jobs are available to people depending on where you live. And what it's showing is that if you're, from Parramatta back to the city, the darker areas, you have incredible jobs choice. More than 50% of all jobs are actually available to you within a reasonable commute on public transport from where you live. You've got lots of choice of where you work. As you get further west in the southwest, the percentage of jobs that you can access within a reasonable commute really gets low. It gets less than 10%. And when you get further west, out to Oran Park and places like that, the challenge becomes, particularly for families with children, the female participation rate drops off. So women are much less likely to work. There's only one income coming in most of those families. Why is that? Because people, they would like to work, they'd like to have a job, but there's this sort of leash of children at school and not wanting to be too far away. What if something goes wrong? We can't have both of us 40 kilometres away if there's a crisis. So they just don't have the jobs around where the kids are going to school. So that's not productive for our society. If people want, if they don't want to work, that's okay. But if people want to work, our society and our economy and our system shouldn't be preventing them with those choices. And this image just shows you what's happening. It's a similar story. It's a little bit different with cars because cars can go anywhere. Public transport's on the lines, on the routes. So with cars, it's a similar story. If you're in Canada Bay or Breakfast Point, life must be great. Sitting on the Parramatta River, looking out of your apartment, you can get all these jobs, more than 50% of all jobs. And as you get further to the southwest, it reduces. So which areas of the economy have been growing? What are the opportunities? What are the hopeful areas that we might be able to capitalise on and try and attract? Well, this is an American graph. There's a fellow called Enrico Moretti. He's an economist at Berkeley. And he's an Italian economist at Berkeley. He's written this great book called The New Geography of Jobs. And in that book, he looks at what's happening in the United States. And he shows some industries didn't exist 10 years ago. Now they're jobs engines. They're really providing a lot of work. Internet, scientific research and development, software, pharmaceutical, those types of industries. And what's interesting about them is they're not occurring everywhere. They're actually not going all over the place. They're only going to some places. And despite the fact that the internet was meant to bring about the great democratisation of employment, it didn't matter where you were, as long as you can be online, you can work. Unfortunately, the opposite's occurred. What he's showing in his research is that agglomeration means where lots of things are together. So agglomerated employment precincts around knowledge-based industries in San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle, bits of New York, Sacramento, those places have grown really strongly. They have these very strong agglomerated employment markets with high-tech firms and so on, high levels of patents. And why have they gone well? Well, there's three factors that he thinks are important. One is education level. So employers will set up where they've got access to the best inputs. And If you're a business that relies on highly creative, scientific labour force, you will go where most people are really qualified. You have better choice for your company. It's a bit like a dating agency. If you wanted to go on a date, you didn't know anyone, you could join the dating agency with 10 people who are looking for a date. Okay, you can pick from 10, that's fine. But you'd be more likely to go to the dating agency with 1,000 or 10,000 people because you have more choice. And it's the same with work, it's the same with employers and where they decide to establish their businesses. Now, most people don't work in software. Most people don't work in scientific R&D or internet. That doesn't matter. His point is that these jobs have a multiplier. So for every one job in the traded sector of the economy, because these things are often intellectual property that's being produced. You know, the iPhone's not built in California, in Cupertino or wherever it is. It's built in China, in the biggest factory in the world, but all the knowledge for that phone comes from the US. It comes from California. And what's important is that these jobs create other jobs, and he's saying they have a multiplier of 5. So for one software engineer or one person working in the high-tech industries, that generates 5 jobs in the non-traded sector. The non-traded sector are the jobs that aren't subject to international competition. Hairdressers, you can't cut someone's hair in China if you live in Australia. Lawyers generally aren't subject to international competition, so it's not just a skill level. But those jobs are created through these high-tech jobs, through the international sales of these sorts of companies. So that's why they're important. It doesn't really matter about the software engineers, it matters about it for everyone else. And if you have these jobs, the other thing that is important about these jobs is a thick labour market and a strong sector like this. It lifts all boats. So if you're an unskilled person and you're working in San Francisco in the coffee shop, you will earn more in your first year than a university graduate in Flint, Michigan or Detroit. So if you want to help people that are struggling or unskilled or doing it tough, it's best for those people to be in these really good employment markets as well. But they're hard to create, these precincts. I mean, Bill Gates moved Microsoft from Albuquerque, New Mexico to not Seattle, where was it? Was it Seattle? I don't know, somewhere up there. Why did he do that? His family lived there. Can governments plan around that? No, it's serendipity. So they are hard to create, these places. Some governments tried, some have tried to pick winners, invest in industries, they haven't been successful. One thing we can do though is to have a highly qualified and educated workforce. That's the game changer in terms of where these companies will be. So what's the government doing about it? Well, the knowledge jobs in Sydney don't exist everywhere. These smarter jobs have been agglomerating in Sydney, and at the Sydney CBD, Pyrmont to the airport and North Ryde, they're the places. They actually haven't been coming to Western Sydney, tragically, unfortunately. This graph is from the University of Canberra, and it shows the location of where those knowledge jobs are. And you look at how important Sydney is for those knowledge jobs. It absolutely sucks up most of them, and most of the places in Western Sydney at the end of the graph. And then if you look at the proportion of workers in knowledge industries, again, Western Sydney's strongly featured in those areas at the end of the graph. Even Parramatta's not particularly, it's up the other end a little bit, but it's not really killing it. And why is that? Well, again, it's about the qualifications. And again, in Western Sydney, the university qualification rate is lower than other parts of Sydney. And we've got to lift that, and as well as lifting the highly skilled training and so on. So that's one of our challenges. Now, even though manufacturing is said to be dead, there are some green shoots, there are some opportunities. And I was at a presentation recently by the head of manufacturing, Deloitte America, and listening to this fella up there talking about new opportunities and not being too depressed about the future. So he was talking about some changes that have been taking place. One of them is a thing called the maker movement. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. So there is this renewed interest in invention, innovation, people who tinker, people who come up with new ideas, who register patents, and how that whole process takes place. And this is a video, I hope I can show this. I was told I can. Here we go. This video goes for about 6 minutes, so sorry about that. I've got a fair bit of time today, so I don't want to bore you. But this is a new thing, and I've been wondering whether there are opportunities for TAFE and this particular business. It's called Tech Shop. So Tech Shop was started in America, and the idea was to buy expensive machinery for manufacturing and for prototyping is really expensive for businesses. To hire, it's really expensive. To train people is really expensive. So these people decided that they would set up a massive workshop, a massive sort of men's shed, women are invited to, and people could pay an annual membership fee to come and join that. And they found that all different sorts of people came and started using this equipment. Some people were just retired people who loved tinkering and inventing things. Some were companies, leading edge companies, who said, this is great, we can access these laser things, and I don't even know what these machines are. We can go and access them for a relatively small membership fee. The other thing that started happening was people started collaborating. So economists call collaboration knowledge spillovers. And cities that don't have places to collaborate aren't particularly productive. And what they found was that all these different sort of vendors would often talk and discuss things. So these tech shops are seen as opportunities for companies to cheaply prototype and develop ideas that could then become manufacturing products. But there are also opportunities for people to come together and to collaborate. So I'll just show you this video, and then we'll keep going. I hope this works. I haven't done this before. I hope there's no ads of anything inappropriate.
Owner gave Wynne a motion-activated wristband to understand how much they move.
We can leave that.
Tech Shop, on the brink of democratizing invention.
On a Friday and Saturday night, this floor literally becomes the most creative place in San Francisco.
It's a lamp that I designed, and it basically unfolds from a book.
We're working on an origami kayak.
It's a phone charger designed for golf carts.
I was just actually hanging up these lamps. So they're actually just touch sensitive.
These are great. Mark, tell me a little bit about the vision of Tech Shop.
Tech Shop's a membership-based fabrication studio. Fundamentally, the idea is cheap access to really powerful tools. This platform really does change the entire paradigm around what it takes to launch a hardware company and changes the nature of the innovation process itself.
So you make all these pieces with this piece of machinery right here?
I do.
How much does this machine cost? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I think they're about $40,000. Obviously, it's not what I'm going to have at home.
Right, of course.
This is the fun part. So
Okay.
you can grab this end.
All right.
And grab this end. Yeah.
Okay.
And just pull on it. It's pop open.
Oh, wow.
Once I joined Tech Shop, I was able to do things a lot faster and better than previously. Just the access to tools was amazing.
Literally, by the end of the week, you'll be producing things out of steel that only a millwright was able to produce 15 or 20 years ago. And that is truly revolutionary.
I've never welded before. Hopefully, I will emerge unscathed. What's the worst thing that could happen right now?
You just get a bad weld. There's one thing that we do before we pull the red button. We say welding.
Wait, first you have to put this down.
Okay, so here I go.
Welding.
So you can see I'm holding it tight with my right hand, bracing it.
Okay. Whew. So it's my turn now.
All right, so you're gonna hold it just like that.
Okay.
And then pull the trigger.
All right.
Go for it. Slow ease. There you go. Look at you.
Oh, that's a beauty. Yeah. I think I should end on a high note. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah.
Jim, some may say your chief innovation is creating a space for other people to invent.
I think that's my best invention yet.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Can you show me some of the things that you built in here?
I built an electric cargo bike for a Burning Man.
You're a Burning Man?
I've been one time.
Okay.
That was fun.
When one goes to Burning Man, you build a bike.
I built this in about 4 days. It's fully electric. It's got 2 car batteries inside.
Wow.
I could have almost lived out of this.
Can I get on this?
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, let's take it out front.
All right, here we go. Here goes nothing. Ooh, ooh. It is a little wobbly. I guess you've always been a tinker. Did that inspire you to open up Tech Shop?
It absolutely did. I was doing software for a long time. When you do software, you don't get to hold the stuff in your hand. So it always bothered me. So when I closed that company down, I decided to work with my hands more. I started Tech Shop just so I could get access to the tools and make stuff. I think unlocking the new technologies that people have in their heads is really important to big companies. I'm really proud of a lot of the products that our members are coming up with too.
And what's one that has struck you that you're really floored by?
That's like saying which of your kids is your favorite kid.
How integral was Tech Shop to the beginning of Dodo Case?
Tech Shop was key for us to scale as quickly as we did as a business. The iPad was coming out, and we wanted to have a device and a product ready when the iPad went on sale. And really the only way we were able to do that is because we had access to the tech shop. You know, there was someone there to teach me the equipment, and then I could spend time on the equipment and tweak and tune. And so I was able to learn exactly what kind of equipment I needed before I ever invested in buying a piece of equipment.
Tell me about Type A machines.
We're a 3D printing company that make this, the Series 1. We started about a year ago. We build these guys right here in San Francisco inside Tech Shop.
So do you think Type A machines would have ever come to fruition had it not been for Tech Shop?
No. That's simple. Just access to the tools that you have here is so critical because it's a simple equation of you can either make the thing or you can't.
Well, show me some other things that you can do with the machine.
Have you got an iPhone? Because that's all you need. If you take roughly 30 to 40 photographs.
Okay, do I stand still?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you just take a whole bunch of photos, and this fantastic app takes all your photos and turns them into a solid model that you can print.
So this is the 40 photos that you just took.
Yep.
They come together to make this. Wow.
So right now we're cutting your model into 0.2 millimeter thick slices.
Okay.
And they stack up, and then we'll send that in the form of G-code to the machine. And the machine will build it up out of plastic layer by layer.
How long does it take for the machine to build it?
This will take probably about 3 hours.
This isn't just for people. This is for anything.
There's practical applications to this too. It's not just a party trick. Tell me about the future of Tech Shop.
We believe that every community eventually needs one of these.
In the next 15 or 20 years, I would love to see literally thousands of tech shops across the United States. If you open access to the tools of innovation up to everyone, just as a recreational basis, you're going to see some amazing things come out.
We are getting it to profitability. It takes us about 2 years to get a site in the black. But the way we've been growing is we've been working with partners. And so Ford helped us open up and stand up the location outside of Detroit. You know what? When a Fortune 7 company calls and says they want to drive innovation in their community, you say, absolutely, let's go.
What are your next steps?
I have to scale up very quickly.
Are you going to still be working every day at Tech Shop? Are you going to cancel your membership?
We'll still keep using it for prototyping at least.
Everybody is doing something pretty amazing here, and it's always inspiring to come in.
I think everyone would want one of these. I want one. Nice ride.
We actually have like more stuff we need welded if you want to stick around.
All right, yeah. You guys going to pay me?
Making things, tinkering, and innovating shouldn't be an odd thing that some people do, but most people don't do. I want innovation just to be something that everyone does and they don't think about it. It's just part of their life.
Better turn it off now. Okay, so I hope that was inspiring and interesting. I mean, really, to me, what that presentation's about is saying if America's transitioning from a mass production manufacturing base to innovation, if that's where the future jobs are, how do you generate them? How do you train people for them? And so it's more about encouraging, sponsoring, inspiring, and bringing together people around innovation in manufacturing and technology than necessarily training thousands and thousands and thousands of people for mass factories that may not be in the US. And I guess when I was looking at this video, when I've been and Tech Shops have been to Australia, they're interested, there's discussions going on with trade and investment. I don't know where it's going to land, but the first time I saw this, I thought, why shouldn't the Tech Shop be in the Technical Institute? Why shouldn't the Tech Shop be in the TAFE, where the training can be provided as well, where the machinery can be used to train other people? Is there an opportunity here? I mean, these things are going to be paid for. This is a private company. They do have discount rates for pensioners, students, war veterans and all that sort of stuff. But it's not a bad thing that it's a private company doing this. But what are the opportunities for collaboration between the public sector and this idea? And if manufacturing is going to have more of a future and it's around innovation, why shouldn't Western Sydney be part of that discussion? You know, we don't want to have a tech shop in Ultimo. Is great. There's nothing wrong with that. That's all good. But shouldn't it be here where we have a lot of the skill base, where we have people that can still train others? Anyway, that's one idea. And I just thought I'd mention that because people do get a bit down about certain industries disappearing. Now, I've lost my presentation. I was only halfway through it. Sorry. Does someone give an indication if I'm going over? I'm going to start boring everyone. Let me know. It was there, so if you can go to there. So now on to the good stuff. So we mentioned there was a jobs deficit, 200,000, it's growing. We need to generate jobs in Western Sydney, but it's really hard because some of these jobs are in industries that are hard to get. They haven't been coming to Western Sydney. So I guess we see there are two big projects or two big ideas that can really shift the needle on jobs in Western Sydney, and not all of it's in southwest Sydney. The first one I'll just touch on briefly because it's maybe a bit less relevant to Liverpool. I think I checked yesterday and there's only about 500 people who live in Liverpool who work every day in the Parramatta CBD, so it's not as important as other parts of Sydney are. But certainly Parramatta is a Western Sydney place. It's 24 kilometres from Sydney. It's an overnight success that's taken about 30 years to come to fruition. It took a long time to get jobs there, and it sort of started and it stopped. Now I think it's actually full steam ahead. Things are really happening in Parramatta. I think in 1971 there was 5,000 people working in the CBD. Now it's 40,000, but that's going to grow and double and triple in the years to come. So Parramatta has a number of things. I actually don't like talking about Parramatta because I think it's a bigger thing than Parramatta. There's Westmead Hospital to the west of Parramatta. Westmead Hospital is the biggest medical precinct in Australia. There are 4 hospitals, 4 medical research entities, 1,000 scientists working in Hawkesbury Road. In terms of people who have PhDs, the highest qualification from a university, where do they live? By suburb. There's 3,000 suburbs in New South Wales. The number 1 suburb is Birchgrove for PhDs. The number 2 suburb is Westmead. Who would have thought in Western Sydney? So that's a thick labour market. The Westmead area is undergoing massive investment, $930 million being spent now rebuilding the hospital, rebuilding the model of healthcare. Just to one side of this, the University of Western Sydney have a major development site that they're wanting to build both housing and high-tech jobs. And right next to this on the other side is the Cumberland Hospital precinct. And we're wondering about the potential for medical technology and biotechnology to be there feeding off the research that's taking place in the hospital precinct. So Westmead is significant. 16,000 people work there, and it's going to grow. It's going to double in size to become I know Liverpool's got an amazing hospital here as well, a very, very large hospital. And medical employment has been growing. It's one of the real growth areas of the whole economy. So you've got Westmead, then you've got Parramatta, and just to the east of that is Sydney Olympic Park. Now, I find it a challenging place, Sydney Olympic Park. It's big, it's a bit confusing to get around, you always get lost, but it actually has a lot of jobs. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers say SOPA is in the 10 most productive employment precincts in Australia. Who would have thought? So there's lots of jobs there now in Sydney Olympic Park, and there's lots of innovation and startups in that back end of Silverwater. Between those areas, there is some opportunities like Camellia. Camellia was the centre for manufacturing in Australia in the 50s. Wonderlic tiles were produced there. That terrible asbestos by James Hardie was produced there. Very few people work in Camellia now. It's 7 times the size of the Parramatta CBD. It's a vast area with very few jobs, but in the middle of Sydney, and it's bookended by Sydney Olympic Park and Parramatta. So what are the opportunities to connect all of these places in a sort of 8-kilometre high-density city where you might get some of these knowledge jobs occurring for Western Sydney? They're not going to be in Blacktown, but at least you might be able to get there within a very short commute, not having to go into the CBD. So that's one opportunity, and we do think Parramatta's going really well, and we've been very supportive as a chamber of the light rail. Light rail's $1 billion has been committed to light rail. We've been advocating for the SOPA route. The other routes are good routes as well, but light rail is going to be a stimulus and a spur to development. These buildings are all proposals that are either under construction or at the DA stage. There's something like, I think, 6,000 apartments being built in the CBD of Parramatta now. There's 4 to 6,000 going in the Westmead area, and along Rose Hill, the Australian Turf Club want to develop, and a lot of other developers want to develop there. So you could see 15,000 to 20,000 new apartments in the CBD in the next few years, as well as the University of Western Sydney building a new 20,000 square metre campus for 10,000 students with a focus on international. So that's one opportunity. The opportunity closer to home, though, is the airport. And this presentation's developed, so it's evolved. It was initially part of a persuasive piece to get people to come on board about the idea of an airport. So some of this is a bit redundant now. This is a graph from... the airport's been around as an issue for 30 years. My father, who went to Liverpool Boys High, grew up in southwestern Sydney, was the first in our family to go to uni. He worked on a study in 1979 called the MAN study, the Major Airport Needs of Sydney study, and that recommended unanimously that Badgerys was the best site for a second major transport airport, and it didn't happen. We know all the politics and all the stories, and not blaming anyone today, but it didn't happen. And I think Western Sydney got scared when the third runway debate took place. The Western Sydney Mayor, George Petrillo, the Mayor of Liverpool, was advocating strongly the airport should go here. We need the jobs. It'll be good for the area. And then we saw all of those debates around the third runway and the noise issues and the impacts, and people said, well, we don't know if we want this thing, why put it out here? That's turned around now. I just want to go through that. So this is redundant now. We've made the decision, but it just showed the demand of passengers expected between Wilton, Richmond and Badgerys. Richmond can start quickly, which in the wrong part of Sydney, it's only going to serve a quarter of the city. Badgerys can start a bit later because you need to do a bit of construction. Wilton would have come later and had less demand, so Badgerys was the right decision. And one of the issues that we came up with, when we started looking at this, noise was a big factor in people's minds, and we thought, well, let's have a look at that. And one of the things that we wanted to check on was, most people thought, well, 30 years ago we were going to do the airport, a lot more people are living there now, we can't possibly do it now, can we? Aren't we all these people living there? So we looked at the noise contours that were developed for the previous environmental impact statement about 17 years ago. And what we found was almost the whole, well, a very large proportion of those noise contours was completely industrial. And Bob Meyer from Cox Richardson checked to see how many houses were in the heavily impacted areas, and he found there had been absolutely zero growth of housing in the contours that were heavily impacted by noise. So some people will have some noise, I'm not saying that, but we are not unique, we're not special. Sydney is like any other city in the world, we face the same challenges. Relatively few people are impacted by noise with Badgerys. Some people are, yes. I can't say that the one person won't be impacted, but compared to the world, compared to Sydney, this is an amazing place to put an airport. And these noise contours, they're based on old planes. They're based on the really noisy planes that were around 20 years ago. And this was on the basis of a fully functioning airport 50 years into the future at maximum capacity. And if you compare, this is the same, this is the Western Sydney employment lands. This is with the black dark line coloured mauve. If you put the size of the Western Sydney employment lands, how big is the Western Sydney employment lands from Eastern Creek to Badgerys Creek? Well, if you overlay it over Sydney, it's kind of all of Sydney. It goes from the back end from Ku-ring-gai out to the bay. So it's a massive, vast area, and imagine how many people there are there compared to there. In fact, Bob did that research, and he found there were about 300 houses in the really heavily impacted corridor, which we think is probably massively overstated, versus 30,000 in the Sydney one. So that's the scale of the problem. It's less than 5% of the issue. And I think we've overcome that discussion. I'll skip this one here. One of the things we found was, and this is more of a political point, if you don't have consensus and you don't have buy-in from the community, you don't have champions for infrastructure projects, sometimes they just don't happen. One project which I thought was quite good was the Epping to Parramatta Railway link. It was announced twice. It was funded twice. It still hasn't been built. Why did that happen? Well, at the time, I think Parramatta Council thought it was a great idea, but they weren't particularly influential. No one in the community actually stood up for that rail line and said, we want this to be built. And so one of the things I've learned in my life in politics is sometimes you can have really good things that just don't happen because people don't get behind them. And I remember I was on the Parramatta station when Julia Gillard was walking down announcing yet again another $2 billion to build that missing link to connect all these places up. And people were cynical. They saw it in the election, they thought it was a pork barrel, or it wasn't going to happen, or it was unreal, or why are you doing it now? There were all these people questioning, we don't want the $2 billion, do we? Well, there must be something in it. Because the support hadn't been built, the base hadn't been built. So one of the things we did with Badgerys Creek Airport was realise that if we're going to get this airport, we have to tell the politicians we want it. This community, Western Sydney, has got to be vocal about it. And so we established a group, which was an unusual thing. It consisted of businesses, trade unions, left-wing community groups, universities, sporting teams. All of those people came on board because they thought it would have a transformative impact on Western Sydney in terms of employment. And this is, I think, how we got the decision to proceed with the airport, because the Pollies were actually the last people to come on board. I mean, there were planets in alignment. The media were very supportive of it. 17 years ago, they weren't, changed their mind. But I think it was actually the fact that we were talking from business, unions, community, sport, The Wanderers came out in support of it. Now, why would they risk their brand for something that's got nothing to do with soccer? Well, they thought, we want to make an impact on Western Sydney. We have all these thousands of members. We know how long they take to get to work. We think this could be a game changer. So this was one of the opportunities to get this back on the agenda. We did a cost-benefit study which showed how many jobs we thought could be created in Western Sydney. We were very conservative. We thought 28,000 jobs. The Commonwealth Government's revised it up to 60,000 jobs. And interestingly, I don't want to keep showing you photos of me. Interestingly, we had a conference this year, a major conference with a number of international speakers. There was a guy from Dr. John Casada from the University of North Carolina, the Centre for Air Commerce. He came out and said, the big game changer for Sydney would be to close Kingsford Smith, to develop that for housing and some jobs, and that land is so valuable that would actually finance high-speed rail to connect Sydney to Badgerys and Western Sydney within half an hour, and that there should be a 21st century mega hub for the whole country built at Badgerys. That would shift massively the employment opportunities out to Western Sydney. Now, it's taken 30 years to get a fragile consensus for a reliever airport, so that's probably a step too far for today, but it's an interesting idea that people are talking about. And just finally, so one of the things we did talk about, Matt Coetzee works around the world on airports. We sort of thought it's interesting to look at airports not just as noisy, smelly places, but all the other things that happen around them. What if airports were considered to be a destination, a conduit, a facilitator of growth? Global air traffic is increasing enormously, and we're expecting it to increase here as well. And increasingly, cities are using airports to position the development of new cities, new aerotropolises or airport cities around those airport precincts. I mean, Sydney Airport and the jobs that are not just in the airport but surrounding it are fundamental to this city's success. And the same opportunities could happen at Badgerys depending on how big and how quickly it ramps up. This is an interesting example. This is in Germany. Now, Frankfurt is not Badgerys Creek. Frankfurt is a hub for Europe, so everyone goes through it. But this building houses, I think, 7,000 staff right on the airport, right on the Autobahn, right on the railway, right on the airport. It has all sorts of things in it. But the head office for Deloitte, one of the big four accounting firms, the European head office is in that building. Why are they there? Because their partners can be at the desks of their clients within an hour anywhere in Europe from that one spot. So we've seen a much smaller version in Canberra. So airports are starting to generate different types of jobs near them. This is in Washington, where the airport actually realised there was a retail opportunity. It's not a particularly attractive one, a freeway with big buildings, but they realised there was an opportunity to capture wallets and money for retail for people travelling to and from the airport. So they actually invested and developed this entire retail corridor on the way to their airport, which has been incredibly successful and has generated a lot of jobs. And interestingly, retail jobs are one of the biggest. There's been massive retail shedding in Western Sydney. If you look at the figures, all this new technology, when you go into your Coles and swipe, that's all great, but lots of people have lost jobs as a result of all that new technology. I mean, there are far less people employed in retail in Western Sydney than there were 10 years ago. Courier services, people say, it's just going to be a courier logistics airport. Well, Australia doesn't have one of those airports. The vast majority of all freight is carried in the underbelly of passenger planes. US is much, much bigger, and they do have some sort of freight logistics airports. But even if it was a freight or logistics airport in addition to passengers, what's wrong with that? That's a need that our community needs that creates some jobs. It could be good. And medical, we think of hospitals as the sort of cleanest, pristine places in the whole city. Medical services are becoming more specialised. Some hospitals are becoming a specialisation in this, in paediatrics or oncology or whatever. So people are having to travel further for medical care. What if airports were close to? What if hospitals were close to airports? Well, there are hospitals that are being built within airport precincts now. And of course, tourism. I know we've got a very short amount of time. Hotels and conference venues. I mean, a lot of hotels in airports, people don't actually stay in the hotel. They just fly in for all their meetings. So they're national companies that need to get together to collaborate, to work out their plans 4 times a year. They don't meet in the city anymore because there's too much interchanging in time. They'll just meet in the airport of the hotel, which is booking out rooms like this for people to have their discussions. So that could be an opportunity for our new airport. And I know There's great discussion about football stadiums in Sydney or sporting stadiums, and every town wants one, and I know the Mayor of Liverpool wants one, and the Mayor of Penrith wants one, and Campbelltown. I'm not sure where the new outer Western Sydney Stadium will go when it is built. Hearing Pertek's going to be upgraded, which I'm a particular fan of, being an Eels and a Wanderers supporter. But it could be that it's at the airport. It could be that it's actually equidistant between Penrith, Campbelltown and Liverpool, and that's the place everyone can get to and the players can fly in and fly out of, and you get more games. Who knows? And Schiphol in Europe. Schiphol has an edge city very close to the airport, which is built up. It's a very big airport, and the biggest flower market in the world is in Schiphol. But, you know, a big commercial office district is built up, and one of the questions is, will Liverpool become the edge city for the new airport for things that can't quite be in an airport precinct, where you need a human scale, small offices, maybe less likely to be in an airport? Will that happen in the Liverpool CBD? We don't know, but we think it could be an opportunity. And even surfing competition. So the European Surf contest, the grand finals apparently have been held at Munich Airport since 2011. So all sorts of interesting things are happening with airports. That's the end of my slide. I think I'm just down to the second, aren't I? So thank you for listening to me. I think there's an opportunity for Q&A or panel discussion now. But there I guess, two opportunities to try and shift the needle and reduce that jobs deficit for Western Sydney and create employment for people that you live with and serve through your educational role. Thank you.